You've got McAvaney, Cometti and Roberts. And then you've got these two, nuffies, living in denial. It's Croft and Horto. Welcome to the Fat Side Podcast.
All right, we're back on the Fat Side Podcast, and today we're going to take a trip down memory lane with Melbourne's Cale Morton. He played 73 games for that particular club, my club, of course, Rob. And he played 3 games for the Eagles in a very small stint over there, but we don't want to talk about that too much. We'll just talk about the Dees and Mark Neeld in particular. But Cale Morton, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. Been a while between interviews, so I'm excited.
Good, because we're very excited. And look, it's going to be a little bit negative, and I apologise. There are certain things that I've put in the run sheet and the notes that Rob and I compiled before that are positive, in especially that game against Fremantle when we were 50 points down at half-time, which was your first win, Cale. And incidentally, it's May the 4th today, so 12 years to the day that Melbourne were epic in that game against Freo. So I want to talk about that one. But before we get into it, mate, you've been out of the game for I think it's 7 years now. So firstly, what are you up to at the moment, post-footy?
Mate, obviously a long time retired now, although I'm still playing local footy, but from the AFL system, 2013 with West Coast was the last year. I was always pretty active outside of footy. I never sort of just immersed myself 100% in footy from a point of view of no work experience or no study. So I went and worked for an HR firm for a couple of years at the end of my career, and then realised, I needed to go and get a degree under the belt. So I went and studied psychology at RMIT. And right now I work in education. So I do a online real estate course for people that want to open their own office, which is a Cert 4. So I manage that course. If anyone listening wants to do that, and
sign
up.
Can't, Rob. It's probably a better profession than podcasting.
Yeah, I might actually be able to pay my rent regularly if I become a real estate agent.
Don't worry, mate. We've all been there.
Yeah, well, Cale, you sound like a bit of a bright spark. You certainly sound a little bit brighter than the Melbourne Demons were during the time when you were there. It was very tumultuous, and we'll go into that in quite some detail. But let's actually take a step back. Let's start when you were over in WA. You got picked up as a junior when you were playing for Claremont, of course, went pick 4 in the 2007 AFL draft. But when you were a spring chicken, Cale, who did you support? Who were your idols, and what was it like playing junior footy back in the day?
Mate, I grew up going for Richmond. Pretty random. Just loved Matthew Richardson, Wayne Campbell, and a bit later in my sort of teen years, I was a big Joel Bowden supporter, which explains a lot about the way I play my footy. Tend to sort of just sit back and, mop up across half-back when and if you can. So that style of, high possession footy was because of my likeliness towards Joel Bowden. But look, I went for Richmond. My brothers went for Essendon and Carlton, so we were sort of all, into the big clubs. It was our dream always growing up to play AFL, and we supported those clubs and, ran around the backyard calling ourselves players from, Essendon, Carlton and Richmond, mate. It was good times.
Funny you mentioned Joel Bowden. He's actually in education as well. When I was in primary school, he came to my school and taught us for a couple of weeks. So there you go, a nice little link there.
Funny story about Joel, actually. My brother, when he was at Richmond, he every year on my birthday, Mitch told him that he was my favourite player. So he used to drop me a little birthday message every year. And mate, honestly, even when I was about 20, 21, 22, a few years in, playing against him, I still had a little wry smile when I got my text off him. So, mate, classic.
I like that. You were my boy, by the way, Cale. I know I texted you that last week, but Rob, you know this. You know that I was a big Cale Morton fan back in the day.
He is a big fan. Adrian's slowly turning this podcast into a Melbourne Demons love-in, if you can't already tell, Cale. 2007 under-18 championships, you voted best player, which is phenomenal. Great score in the beep test. Then draft comes, pick 4. Talk us about that lead up, because you must have been pretty stoked to finally get the Guernsey.
Yeah, mate, it was great. So had a really good carnival. in all honesty, prior to that carnival was probably late first round, maybe early second round pick. Always knew I was going to get drafted. There was no doubt about that from probably about the age of 16. But it wasn't ever going to be sort of top 5. And then had that carnival, played really well, probably exceeded what I, felt that I could do.
Did you play like Joel Bowden?
I actually played on the wing. And, I mean, it was funny. I just got a lot of uncontested marks and ran and bounced every time I got it. So when they're, doing the votes at the end of the game, I think they sort of thought, oh, he had a bit of it.
Nice. You played like Andrew McLeod then?
Yeah, pretty much. Exactly the same. Actually, that's a good one. Good scenario. So played in the carnival, got the best player, absolutely thrilled. Probably a bit lucky, really. I thought Reece Palmer had a pretty good carnival, and so did he. So I won that award, ended up sort of being in conversations for top 3, top 4, which was a bit of a shock to the system. To be honest, I definitely wasn't the 4th best player in the draft. But, played out of my skin for about 2 weeks and got catapulted right up to the top of the draft order. A great day getting drafted, having 2 older brothers that had already gone through it. I was sort of, the anticipation was, through the roof. I just couldn't wait for the day to come. And in hindsight, would have loved to have gone a bit later in the draft and just sort of gone under the radar a bit. But, at the same time, I was loving every minute of it at the time. So no complaints from me.
What about Melbourne, though? What was the general feeling when your name was read out with Melbourne? Or did you not really care? It was just a matter of, I just want to get drafted to any club.
I had a meeting the day before with the senior management. So Dean Bailey, a couple of recruiters, few coaches and whatnot. And they committed to me at pick 4. And right from that moment, I sort of got this sense that the club were, I don't know, in a way, really strong traditionally, but they were pretty much admitting that they're underperforming. They're not where they like themselves to be. So I knew right from the start there was going to be a challenge. It was just clear to me that there was a lot of work ahead for everyone to do, and not just the playing group, but also the footy department. But I was pretty shocked when I walked in the door at the state of the club. Obviously, Junction Oval, they had been training there for a while, and I probably was surprised that they'd been doing so well in the early 2000s with pretty subpar training facilities. So when we moved to Amy Stadium, it was, going from the worst to the best. And that sort of was just one of my first impressions of getting to an AFL club. Was like, shit, I thought it'd be a bit nicer than this. It's pretty similar to what we had down at the Claremont Footy Club. So, I knew there was a lot of work ahead of us. And, and obviously still is for the guys, but we're getting there.
Yeah, we're getting there, slowly but surely. We'll ask you a question towards the end about the current crop and who your favourite players are. But, Cale, you took the words out of my mouth. I wanted to speak about when you first got to the club, because Neil Danaher, he leaves halfway through 2007. You've got Chris Judd rumoured to go to Melbourne. He obviously doesn't choose Melbourne. He chooses Carlton. You've got David Neitz hanging up the boots. You've got Kevin Sheedy touted as a potential coach, but they go with Dean Bailey. There was just so much change at the club. It was incredible. A lot of senior players at the end of their careers, and throughout your stint at the club, a lot of those players would retire at season's end in those various campaigns. So it must have been, as you said before and alluded to, it must have been a real shock to the system to walk into a club that wasn't up to scratch in terms of its facilities. Did you get the underlying impression as well that the list clearly wasn't up to scratch, and that maybe some people in the football department weren't going to cut it or at least get us back on the right path? What was your feeling, or did it take more time to kind of understand that?
No, I felt as though there was a huge gap between best and worst players on the list. You probably had a pretty good top 5 group of senior players, and then your middle group of players, which are traditionally strong for finals clubs, like your Hawthorns, your Sydneys and your Geelongs. It's the depth through the middle of their list that kind of gets them to where they finish every year, which is usually top 4, top 6. Melbourne had this big void of players where there was just, no, mid-20s up-and-coming players who were playing consistently well. So from that point of view, I thought the list had definitely had some holes in it, but the club thought that they had the people that were going to fill those holes, and that was all the early draft picks that they had. Unfortunately for them, it didn't work out, and for us as well. But it's not entirely anyone's fault. The system that they had, or the footy department, was probably under-resourced. Players who needed development probably weren't getting the nurturing or the type of coaching that was required to get the best out of themselves. So everything, all the I guess the recipe was, all the components were there, but it just didn't come together. And it's a bit sad that the club have not had success for a long period of time, because they are such a good traditional, club with so many supporters out there who are absolute diehards. And I think everyone sort of deserves for the Dees to be right up contending again, hopefully soon. But some would argue, I'm sure you would, that it should have happened sooner. But hopefully it comes soon.
Oh, well, it is what it is. That's the motto for isolation, and that's the motto for the Melbourne Football Club for the last 50 plus years, Rob. But anyway, you can take the floor on the next question.
Yeah, is what it is, mate. 2008, you finally get your debut, but it's a pretty hard start. Both games, the D's get absolutely flogged. Bit of a rude awakening, getting into the AFL landscape that way.
Oh, mate, it was shocking. So Hawthorn round one, I think we lost by 96 points. And then Bulldogs round two, we lost by, I think it was about 90-ish again. And I was just thinking, this is terrible. I want to go, hide under a rock or something like that. And it was just really a baptism of fire. After my last games of footy were pretty much the state carnival where, I took my own footy, had it on a string, whatever. And then you get to the AFL and you're lining up on someone like Chance Bateman or one of those guys who just absolutely pulls your pants down. And you're just like, wow, this is absolutely going to suck. But to be honest, it was a good way to, learn and to get into it. We played some good clubs early, and then we didn't win too many games in my first year. I think it was 3 or 4. But those games that we did win, we sung the song pretty loud, and that was a good feeling. But those first couple of games, mate, they were horrible.
What was it like? Was it after it's, I don't know, it's hard as a supporter to really truly understand what it's like for some of the battling clubs to get beaten week in, week out by big margins. But like, how low is that feeling, knowing that you've put in the preparation, you've put in the time and effort, people have rocked up to come and watch you give you your all, and then you're getting absolutely flogged? Is that the worst feeling as an AFL footballer, to just get flogged every week?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because there are some things that come about. You lose those 2 games by so much, and then as a footy club, you start accepting mediocrity. You lose by 30 points, and everyone's sort of slightly happy. And in those first couple of years, there was definitely games where people expected us to lose by 100 points, and if we got within 40 or 30 points, I think everyone sort of gave us a bit of a pat on the back. And part of the issue with Melbourne was the standards were just not quite where they needed to be. You lose like that, and you can hear a pin drop in the change rooms after the game, and then you might lose, a game by 2 or 3 goals, and everyone's sort of saying, that was a good effort, guys. That was well done. But at the end of the day, if you're not winning, there shouldn't be nothing to celebrate really. But those couple of losses and a few of the other losses we had that year were terrible, and then some of the ones that we competed well for, we were sort of giving ourselves a pat on the back, which probably in hindsight led to some bad habits around the club.
Now, you did manage to play 19 games in your first year, and you did get rewarded with the best first-year player for the club. So even though it was a pretty hard year for everybody, that was a nice silver lining for yourself.
Yeah, it was, mate. It was a good reward for effort. I worked my ass off from the moment I got to the club. I made it my single objective to win the running, and I won all the time trials and everything that I possibly could through the pre-season. So I sort of set myself up to get that opportunity for round one. I don't know, they probably in a way had to pick me, but it was fun. It was a good pre-season. I loved it. I worked hard, and then the season that I had was probably a little bit inconsistent, but that was probably on the back of the way the team was performing. But it was great, mate. Yeah, it was good. Won that award, and I think that was probably the last one that went in my trophy cabinet, actually.
Now, Cale, it's been great in isolation to go back through and watch all these classic matches. Been thoroughly enjoying it. The only problem with Fox Footy at the moment is there aren't too many reruns of Dees games for an obvious reason. We haven't had much success in the last 50 plus years, as I said before, but they have been showing a few. I watched one last night, the 94 semi-final against the Doggies. Gary Lyon kicked 10 goals, was absolutely immense. A lot of fun watching the lads back then. But one of my favourite wins is actually your first win, your debut win against Fremantle. We're down by 50 points. I was there. There was only 20,000 of us packed into the G on a Sunday. But the atmosphere was absolutely raucous, particularly in the last quarter. The lads had threatened early in the third to really get back into the game, but then Pav kicked a couple towards the end. But you never gave up. Brent Maloney was immense. I know that Flash in the third quarter was probably one of the reasons why we gave ourselves a sniff. And then enter Wanamiri and Robertson in the last quarter. Like I said, there weren't many there, but the place was absolutely buzzing. That must have been such a relief and a great feeling, not only for yourself, but the players to just finally get a win that season and do it in such ridiculous circumstances.
It was an amazing win. And the best part was, I think we're down, was it 54 points or thereabouts at halftime?
50 at halftime, yeah.
And look, 9 times out of 10, that team that was playing would have laid down and just, conceded to losing by 80 or 100 points. But that particular day, there was just some sort of feeling that we're still a chance. And I think that we sort of clung onto that hope for, the first few minutes of that third quarter, and think we could notice things changing. Even though on the scoreboard, we were still down by 30 or 40 points, it felt like we were on top. And that momentum and that confidence for a young playing group can be huge. And then, I'll never forget Wanamiri's celebrations and kicking those goals. And mate, you're right. That 19 or 20,000 people in the crowd honestly felt like, I reckon it felt like about 60 or 70,000. And it was an amazing win. Good way to get off the mark. Probably the most memorable one as well that I had. So no, it was a great day.
Jumping ahead to 2010, bit of an injury interrupted season for yourself. Shuffled around, a few different positions. The coaches try out there. Can you talk to me about your relationship with the coaches and them sort of going, all right, rather than you getting your Joel Bowden position that you'd like, they start playing you different places, and how that sort of developed?
Oh, mate, the writing was on the wall for me pretty much at the end of my first season. I was always a very attacking, sort of free-flowing footballer. Look, I'll be honest, I don't like to tackle and defend a whole lot. But, either does Brendon Goddard, and he's a fantastic player. There are good players out there who can get away with it, but I was just not quite good enough to get away with it. So the writing was on the wall pretty early. My review after the first season was about, developing the other side of my game a bit more in terms of defending and tackling. So through the pre-season, they put me with the defenders and all that sort of crap that you get at primary school when they're trying to develop, part of your game. I rejected it a little bit. Dean Bailey was a huge fan of mine, and to this day, one of the best coaches I've ever had, because he believed in me and he acknowledged, everyone's got their strengths, but we do all have weaknesses as well. Whereas Mark Neeld and a couple of other really average coaches, they focus on your weaknesses. So there was always that sort of issue. When Neeld took over, I think if it wasn't my first day, it would have been the first week that he was there. He called Watsy, myself individually into his office and said, look, I don't rate you, I just don't think that you're a good player. So it's sort of like a bit of a rough start to have after coming off 40 games in your first 2 years, and then sort of going, well, you know what, this guy doesn't like me and I've got to put up with it because he's the coach. So then they started trying, developing that, defence and playing in the back line and tagging people. And look, one of the best games I had was tagging Adam Goods at the MCG. We won, I think we beat Sydney by about 75 points, and I sort of did an average job on him. But, mate, just running around beside someone like that.
Yeah, wow.
star of the game. It was a good learning curve for me. Didn't help me much, but in terms of experience, it was great. But yeah, mate, like all of that stuff, coaches, you just got, you got to take it with a grain of salt. They're all trying to keep their job, and there's people like me that have probably copped it worse from coaches. And I mentioned Watsy. He's one that sort of coaches tend to love or hate as well. But we're laconic types. We're naturally skilled. We've got a lot of talent. We don't look like we're trying that hard. But you know what? It's not our fault we're born that way.
Yeah.
I like it. I just want to pick you up on Dean Bailey. We'll get to Mark Neeld. We're gonna throw a bit of crap at Mark Neeld, that's for sure. But the annoying thing for me with Dean Bailey is I'm the same as you, and I think a lot of Melbourne supporters out there feel the same way too. That Dean Bailey, we had belief in what he was trying to implement. The problem was there was this underlying impatience from my external viewpoint that if we weren't getting the results, that the performances themselves weren't going to stack up and they weren't going to allow him the time he probably needed. And you bring it back to resources as well and some of the appointments in the footy department, and people can read between the lines about who those particular people were that clearly didn't work for the club. But the one day that obviously sticks out, and I've spoken about this quite a bit on the Debrief podcast, and it's hard to speak about it, and it's hard to speak about it knowing that they changed the scoreboard during the second quarter to Casey instead of Melbourne in the 186-point loss against Geelong. I was there in the flesh. I go down to Cardinia Park every year and have done since 2005. That day for me was obviously the straw that broke the camel's back for Dean Bailey, and perhaps the reality check Melbourne really needed. Now, of course, we know it didn't work out that way because we go and make a stupid appointment to get Mark Neeld in as senior coach. But that day had been building, Cale, in my opinion, when you look back on it, for so long. Now it was a pathetic effort. It was horrible to experience as a supporter. I left that day feeling absolutely shattered. I felt like my club had almost died in that very instance. I felt like that day was incredibly harsh on a bloke like Dean Bailey. I just want to know a little bit about the mood of the club in those days after, because again, it's not easy to talk about days like this when your club gets smashed by 186 points. But I think for a lot of people, that was kind of, all right, they'd given up the ghost. And I think a lot of Melbourne supporters felt disenchanted. They didn't really want to go back to the club or put their money where their mouth is. What was that like to experience something of, such a monumental nature in a negative sense?
Yeah, it probably was the biggest event that happened in my time at the club in terms of impact on the football club. It was a shocking day. I don't know if you remember, but the reserves in the morning lost by 140 points. And then the seniors came out and lost by 186 points. So for a football club, not just the 44 players that were playing, the other 60 staff that work for the club, it was embarrassing. It was such a terrible feeling in terms of results. It could not have gotten any worse. You couldn't script it worse. So the following morning, we went into the club, and I think Steve Monaghetti or someone like that came down to the club and did an inspirational speech. And I don't think anybody looked at anyone else in the eye the whole day. And then shortly thereafter, we found out that Dean Bailey had been sacked pretty much effective immediately. But in my mind, it was such a reaction. I don't think that he was the problem. It was the way that the club dealt with and handled situations leading up to that point, and then that point inclusive. So they sacked him. They said, look, we play too free-flowing football. We don't defend. We score goals, but we need to stop other teams from scoring and get harder. So we go out and hire a coach that has got no experience, and he's must have sold it to them in the meeting, oh yeah, we'll get the boys tackling and we'll do all that. But you're trying to sort of look for short-term fixes because of that day pretty much. And the club knew that they couldn't make a mistake in choosing the next person. So they went with the person with the hardest edge who could come in, and he coached under Malthouse and all these different things. But it was just a reaction. And if they had their time again in that search for a coach, they should have gone for somebody who suited a younger playing group rather than someone who might have got the best out of, the guys who love getting a rev up and love, it's like getting torn strips off them every week. But mate, if at that point in time they either stayed with Bailey or decided to go another direction and got a different coach, I think the club would have avoided that sort of 2 or 3 year hole that we fell into.
We'll move on to Mark Neeld next. Absolute disaster for the club. I know myself as an Essendon supporter, he came in as an assistant coach for us, and I speak with a lot of Essendon people, and the one thing they said was that he would make simple things seem complicated, was the way he explained stuff. And there'd be some people who try and, dumb things down to people and make it simple, go, this is your job, this is what you got to do. But he was like this kind of mastermind who couldn't quite explain what was going on upstairs. How did you find Mark?
Mate, he got sacked twice from 2 different footy clubs. Like, the bloke can't coach. It's no secret. And in terms of personality, like he offered nothing. I don't think anyone had really a good positive experience with him. And look, nothing against the guy. I'm not saying that it was, anything was his fault or he's to blame, but just he came in and tried to do things his way, and the playing group were going that way. And this isn't good for any organisation. And he just wanted, he wanted blood, and it's well publicised that there were a few players who were sort of easy targets for him, myself included. But mate, it was a bit of a rough experience for a lot of people in terms of where they were at with their footy. If you're in your sort of, in your first 50 games, or if you're in your 150 games, I don't think it really mattered. It was probably some of the hardest times that you had in your career, trying to work through that, and just a footy club that's just so confrontational. Every day that you're at the club, you didn't feel like you were particularly enjoying it, because there was going to be some sort of conflict or some aggro, or everyone was on edge, and it's not conducive to developing young footballers. And it is what it is. We know what happened after that, but look, I just think that the footy club, in the selection of that coach, could have thought and considered things a bit better. So it's not Mark's fault. He probably would have made a good assistant coach with a young group, but being the main man and his personality type wasn't the right fit for the club. But you know what? At the time, they felt that it was right. And I'm sitting here. I've got the beauty of hindsight, but I wasn't a fortune teller. I couldn't have confidently said this at the time. But just not a good fit for the footy club.
No, and it was embarrassing. Melbourne needed some light at the end of the tunnel, and the tunnel actually got darker as a result of employing Mark Neeld. I feel nauseous thinking about the man, and I'm being completely honest, because a lot of the supporter base still think this way. And look, we try to poke a bit of fun and keep it a bit cheeky, and I put a post up yesterday. I don't know if you saw it, Rob, but I put a post on the debrief yesterday. Jimmy Tumpus and Mark Neeld, and they had the jumper at the draft day, and I was saying if 2020 was a draft, and this photo kind of represents it. And look, I know you're a scapegoat, and I'll put my hand up and I'll apologise right now to your face, Cale. Like, people like me and plenty of the supporters would hang shit on guys like yourself and Tumpus and these high draft picks and use them as a way of, I guess, deferring responsibility. But the reality is, the older you get, the more you get, entrenched in the actual inner workings of a football club, and you start to figure out how important the footy department is, the administration, the president, the chairman. And then you start speaking to people like Russell Robinson last week, and you realise that if the framework's actually not put in place for the players themselves to try and help them strive towards excellence, then you're already stuffed before you even started. So when you said, and it's interesting to hear you say that you already felt like the writing was on the wall for you, even after your first year, when you were best first year player. Did a lot of the players communicate privately about how the club was broken and not unified, or did you try and sweep it under the carpet and just do the best job you could?
Nah, because we were doing that thing. I don't know if you remember. What is it? Leading team. You guys know that
Rings
one?
a bell.
No. What is that? Is that like a mentoring program or something?
There were a number of AFL clubs who were engaging with a leadership development or mentoring program called Leading Teams. So Melbourne it was very funny and pretty ironic that everything would bottle up, and we used to have these huge Leading Teams sessions where we do 360-degree feedback on each other. And you could ask Robbo about his, if you ever speak to him again. He copped it for throwing his boots into the crowd one day, and I remember sitting there as an 18-year-old going, honestly, we've finished third last or fourth last year, and we're talking about Robbo, who's 32 and played 250 games, about him throwing his boots into the crowd. Like, what's important here? Are we just trying to get something off our chest personally that we've got against someone, or are we trying to become a better footy club? And these sessions occurred over years where, privately, you probably didn't get the tap on the shoulder from a senior player to say, hey, you need to do this, this, and this, which I hear happens at other clubs. It was more, let things bottle up, and then we'll get him at the front of the group and we'll just absolutely lay it on him. And we did these sessions every couple of months, and they were absolutely horrific. And, it could make a grown man cry nearly, and there was a few people who were not far from it. My issue was, so I got up there and they started having a go at me, and I would just argue back with them and say, no, that's bullshit. And it didn't end too well. But it was an interesting method of communication. Again, if I was a general manager of football operations, I think I'd try and develop the younger players differently than those 360-degree feedback sessions. But apparently they worked really well at Geelong, and that was the thing with Melbourne. We're always trying to copy what other teams did, but we didn't quite have the sort of culture for those things to work.
We do the 360-degree feedback in the office, Adrian and I, and usually he ends up in tears after I roast him. So it's just what happens.
There's heaps of things I haven't bottled up yet.
So what would be your number one criticism of each other if you just had to think of something on the spot?
I don't think Adrian is direct enough. He likes to go around issues with people, and I might tell them this, and he'll go, yeah, and he won't tell them what I've asked. That's my big thing.
I think that's tongue-in-cheek because the irony is I am the opposite. But anyway, mine would probably be Rob's indecisiveness with women.
That's a low ball. Absolute low ball.
Well, there you have it. So here we are doing 360-degree feedback on each other.
Hey, that's a good thing because at least I haven't pointed out anything work-wise. I've just pointed something out that's personal. That's all.
Let's talk about my dating life. Back to footy. You play with some interesting characters in your time. Fucking hell, Adrian. You play with some interesting characters in your time. Liam Jarrah, out of this world. As a neutral fan, when you see the Dees were on telly, you'd be like, oh, at least I can watch Jarrah play. What was he like?
Yeah. Freak. And interesting guy as well. Just generally quite, when I say interesting, I don't mean that he provided us as teammates with interesting content, because we didn't really speak to him. He was very quiet. He was very unassuming. In fact, I don't remember crossing paths with him too many times off the footy field. So he kept to himself. He was very quiet, but intriguing is you sort of, you can't believe how talented the guy was and where he came from and his upbringing and off-field issues and everything that happened in between. You just look at him and go, mate, you're probably one of the most skillful, talented, best footballers I've ever played with. And, we saw what he was capable of doing on the field, and it's a juxtaposition for how completely opposite things were, and life off the field for him. So to me, super interesting in terms of his story, but what a freak. Honestly, one of the best I've graced the field with. A rare talent that we may never really see anyone like that again.
Whoa, how's that? I love that. There's a certain man by the name of Nuggets who is going to absolutely salivate. Nujay will be enjoying those comments. Totally agree. Liam Jarrah was magnetic. He was like nothing else I had seen on a football field as well. You talk about Adam Goodes before. Adam Goodes is probably the best player I've watched in the flesh live. Buddy's probably up there as well. But there was something about Liam Jarrah where he would make the impossible angles possible. And then the other thing, Cale, was just the big hangers he took as well, which were absolutely berserk. It's just such a shame what happened to Liam, of course, and it was good to see him back at the club a couple of years ago with some of the former Dees players doing a few things for Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders. But it's a shame because you look at his goals per game ratio in a shit-house side. Let's be frank about that. The bloke was on course to kick his 400-500 goals and be a Demons great if he'd played the 200 games that we hoped he would. So it's just a shame.
Yeah, mate, unbelievable. Honestly, yeah, the talent that he had was outrageous, really. And he just had the best hands, and his kicking was phenomenal. He was actually really powerful. He didn't look it. He wasn't strong, but he had a massive leap, and he could kick the ball a long way. Yeah, he was a really special talent.
Now, Cale, we're all remembered for certain things that happened on the field. We had Brad Saul on, who's a two-time premiership player, but a lot of people remember him for getting knocked out. You're remembered for an incident that happened with a man by the name of Brendon Goddard, and I had to bring it up. Can you just play-by-play run it through to me? What happened with you and Brendon?
Mate, this is my recollection of it. I saw a ground ball, a loose ball on the ground, and he was coming the other way. And he chickened out, and I got in and got the hard ball. And then I handballed it to a teammate, and he's pushed me, and I've turned around and pushed him. And as the ball was coming down the broadcast side at Amy Stadium, I'm watching the ball. I see the ball, and I take off. And I think if the play, honestly, don't quote me on this, but if the camera panned to the long view, I actually think that I may have got the ball. I can't remember. I had 28 that day and might have kicked one or two as well. Okay. So it was a good day at the office for me, but just that particular camera angle, and I think it was Billy Brownless that really sort of rubbed salt into the wound. Funny story, actually. I was in Thailand at the end of the year, and I had a few messages from the Melbourne media manager around the time of the grand final footy show. And I got back to him and said, mate, what's happening? What are you up to? And he goes, oh, you've actually won Tool of the Year. Are you in Melbourne? And I said, no, because it was a 5 or 10 grand check I think they used to give. Oh. So I had to settle for runner-up, and I got Tool of the Week, which was a DeWalt, I think, or Ryobi power drill, which I couldn't tell you what that is, but
that is outstanding.
So it was worth running away from Brendon Goddard then.
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, no, it was good. Funny, yeah. And people will say to me, "Oh, you ran away. You're weak," and I go, "They'll watch the game of football." I don't think that's really a guy. No matter how big he is, he can't kill you on the field. But yeah, it's funny. I mean, particularly for a lot of the Melbourne supporters who really wouldn't like me after everything that's happened to the club. I mean, that gives them a good little bit of ammo, doesn't it? And we all need it. We all need a bit of ammunition and to, feel like we've got the wood over someone else. So there it is.
Yeah, of course. No, it is one of the most infamous clips on the internet, period, when it comes to footy, Cale. So famous in that respect. So we'll leave it at that. But just a quick one before Rob does his famous quiz. What about the current crop? We spoke about it a little bit before. They seem to be on the right path. People are trying to figure out whether last year was an aberration or not. There's been countless articles written about Simon Goodwin and whether he's the right coach, and Melbourne not getting their inside 50 forward entry right. And there's obvious problems still that they need to iron out to potentially get back to 2018 form. Although I stand by the opinion that the game plan was quite chaotic anyway. But what about the current crop? What do you feel about them, and who are some of your favourite players that you love watching at the moment?
Look, I think the list is good. It's a pretty solid list. And if you remember what I said pretty much at the start of this, where I said that when I got to the club, there was no core group of players. I think now we're the opposite. We've got such a good core group of players. We're probably lacking that real top-end talent. But you know what? Like with Jake Lever, getting back into it after he did his knee. Gorney, I think there are the good players there, but they're probably just not the right type of players. And I think if Melbourne, did get a gun mid, particularly someone that can play, outside-ish.
Like you.
Could have been me. But, I think we're still a couple of star players away from having that really good list. Jonesy, and Todd and Jack Viney, they're great players, and they've been very serviceable. But where we need to head to next is those good outside mids that can sort of do the work with Oliver and Gawn. And I think we're just sort of a couple of good mids away from being a top 8 side. That 2008 prelim final was obviously terrible, but don't discredit the year that they had, because they were playing above themselves. And to maintain that as they did for 3 or 4 weeks, of the final series, that's really good for your sort of your psyche and actually developing good habits. That were definitely not the case when I was there. But those finals games that they won, and unfortunately they undid all their hard work. But they're heading in the right direction. It's just I still think there's a couple of good top end players short of a good list.
There you go. Promising signs for Melbourne Demons fans. Now,
shut up, Rob. You don't care.
No,
you don't care.
No, I care about Essendon, so we've got our own problems.
Yeah, you got plenty of problems. Yeah. Do you know what the worst thing is, Cale? Being a list that's in no man's land, and that's the epitome of Essendon right now.
Yeah, but mate, it doesn't take you bring in a player or two here and there, and those players that are playing on the best opposition small forward all of a sudden playing on the second or third best, and that sort of dynamic can change pretty quickly, and you've seen it happen with other teams. But I think just a couple of good players, maybe in a couple of years we'll be right. But the good guns and our best players are still at that right age with Gorney and Clayton Oliver and those kind of guys.
Love it.
Nice one. All right, well, it's time for the quarantine quiz, Cale. This is something we've been doing since lockdown with all our guests that we've had on. So 10 questions. Some are footy related, some are general knowledge. I'll give you this is the leaderboard at the moment. Glenn Manton's on top with 6. Alan Tuvey got 5. Brad Saul and Russell Robertson got 4 each. And Alex Johnson got 2. So if you beat AJ, so I'm confident you'll beat AJ.
He's a moron, Alex. Yeah. He's an absolute moron.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, how many questions are there?
10 questions. 10 questions. All right. Question 1. Who won the 2013 Brownlow medal?
2013 was Matthew Priddis?
No. It was Gary Ablett Jr. at the Gold Coast. There you go.
Cale, come on.
Question 2. Daniel Ricciardo drives for which Formula One team?
McLaren?
No, he drives for Renault.
Oh, mate.
Question 3. You can still get 8.
Freeze.
You can still get 8.
People freeze.
Still get 8.
When they get to the quiz, they freeze.
All right. Question 3. Which of these 3 countries is landlocked? A, Ecuador, B, Uruguay, C, Bolivia.
I'm going to say Bolivia.
That is correct. Well done. Well done. You're on the board. Question 4. On the periodic table of elements, which element is number 6?
Gold?
No, it's carbon. Carbon. Alrighty. Question 5. Which British duo had the popular dance hit Hey Boy, Hey Girl?
Can you repeat the question? British duo?
Yes. British dance duo. I guess you could call them DJs if you'd like.
Oh,
Hey Boy,
okay.
Hey Girl. It's very well known.
Come on, Cale. Hey boy, hey girl.
Do you have a guess?
Have a guess?
Yeah.
Daft Punk.
No, they're French.
Oh, it's not a bad guess. The only problem, Rob, is it wasn't Avicii.
Yeah, it wasn't Avicii.
Because we saw a little quiz from you at your time during the Eagles. It's funny how we haven't spoken about the Eagles at all.
Oh, wow. Have you seen that?
Yeah, and you referenced Avicii and you said you pulled a few moves on the dance floor and it gets you going, mate. One of your finest clips.
That CQ nightclub.
There you go.
With Scotty Horton.
With Scotty Horton. It was the Chemical Brothers. That's what I was looking for.
Oh, okay, yeah.
All right, question 6. How many goals did Israel Folau kick for the Giants in his time there? I'll give you a clue. It's under 10.
I'm going to go with 4.
It's even less than that. It was 2.
He kicked 2 goals.
All right.
Do you know what's funny? Can I tell a quick little story about him?
Yeah, go.
AJ, who's a mate of mine. Alex Johnson was playing on Israel Folau in the NEFL once, and he spoke to him after the game, and he shakes his hand and he goes, "Oh, how was it, mate? How are you finding it?" And Israel Folau just replied to him and he goes, "I've got no fucking clue what I'm doing." Straight after the game when he just started out. So pretty obvious that even from the start he was never going to make it.
That's funny.
Poor.
$3 million a year as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And now he's an interesting guy.
There we go. Question 7. In which country is the city of Shiraz? As in the wine. Is it A, Spain, B, France, C, Iran, or D, Russia?
Oh my God. I'm gonna go France is the obvious answer, but I'm gonna have to say Spain.
Incorrect. It's Iran. Who would have thought? Who would have thought?
That was the outlier.
Yeah, who would have thought?
Oh, is Cale on track to be last at the moment with Jono?
Yeah, he's on one. But don't worry. I think these next couple of questions are a bit easier. I think you might get these. Okay.
So
Question 8. Camelot is the castle and court of which famous king?
Camelot.
Yeah. Who lived in Camelot?
Which country was the king from?
England. It's like a famous medieval, almost mythological king.
Mythological king.
He pulled a sword out of a stone.
Camelot. UK. Sword out of a stone. No idea.
we go.
Napoleon.
He's French. It was King Arthur.
Rob, don't make him feel silly. Come on, Mark Neeld made him feel silly. Don't do it to Cale. Poor Cale.
Just so you know, Cale, Adrian messaged me halfway through this interview going, "This guy's really smart. You can tell by the way he talks, but you're on one. You're on one."
So you guys have been texting each other?
Yeah, well,
because we need to figure out when we need to go,
Yeah.
so then we don't talk over the top of each
Yeah.
other. It's always a problem with
because we're
Zoom.
not in the room together. Like you have to be like, "Your turn. Now you go. Now you go." So
Yeah, and I was like, "Oh, geez, he's a lot smarter than Alex Johnson,
Yeah.
this bloke." But clearly, Cale, you
this isn't easy. Surely you'll get this one. Question 9. Matt Groening is the creator of which famous television show?
Simpsons.
Yay! There we go. He's on 2
So
points.
he's got to get this one to get above AJ.
Okay.
You have to give it to me.
Okay. Question
I'll
10.
text you.
According to the website AFL Tables,
Mm.
how many Brownlow votes did you get in your AFL career?
4.
That is correct.
Yeah!
Yes.
That was in 1 year.
It was in 1
And I
year.
think I polled the most for Melbourne that year.
There you go. Wow. There you go. I didn't know that.
like
That's a nice little fun fact to add on the end of it.
I thought
So,
you were going to say who had 37 touches in round 7, 2009.
was it you?
Also me.
There you go.
Mr. Cale
There you go.
Morton. I like it.
Yeah.
You could be a admin for the useless AFL stats page. Have you seen that one?
That's a good.
King Arthur's stats.
King Arthur's stats.
At least you beat Jono.
Yeah. So look, you're not last. You're on 3. You're sandwiched in between Russell Robertson and Alex Johnson. So you're in some nice company there. But sadly, there's no grand prize coming your way, Cale.
That's okay, mate. Don't worry about it.
Cale.
There's always next time.
Always next year.
That's right. That's right. Well, look,
Yeah.
mate, I reckon we'll wrap it up there. But it's been a pleasure speaking to you. I really appreciate your honesty talking about what were some tumultuous times for you in your Melbourne Demons career. And, it's really sensitive information. So I do appreciate you lifting the lid on a few things from back in the day that I'm sure Melbourne fans probably don't want to think of anymore. And for the neutral fans that are watching this podcast, I'll probably be reveling in Melbourne's plight at that time. But it's been really good, mate. And I guess above all else, it's just great to see that everything's going pretty well outside of footy. You seem settled. You seem happy. And that's all you can ask, really, when you have stories like last night come out. You just hope the people that leave the AFL system are in good hands. So it's good to know you're going well, mate.
Hey, thanks for having me. As I said, it's been a long time between media commitments, but what a great way to get back into it than with you boys. So thanks for having me. Hope I gave you guys some insight into what it was like at Melbourne at that time. And honestly, from the bottom of my heart, still love the Dees. So most importantly, for all those Melbourne supporters out there who are thinking, I might have said a few bad things about the club. Love them, still support them, still talk to a couple of the guys, and really hope them, wish them well for the future.
Lovely.
Very good words. Very good words. That was a jinx. Lovely, by the way, Rob. That was a bit weird.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, we'll leave it there.
Room.
Thanks a lot, Cale.
No worries, boys.
Thanks,
Thanks for
Cale.
having me. Appreciate it.